Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of 10 minutes or so of ancient warfare ranting and raving, where I attempt to answer the question of a viewer, reader, or listener. More of that anon. You can, of course, send us a question. You can send me a postcard or a letter. You can write me an email. You can comment on a previous podcast or video on YouTube. You can, of course, back us on Patreon, one of 3 different levels: Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. I almost said Princeps again there. And at different payment levels, you get a copy of the magazine digitally or even in print. And, Patreons can answer us questions, but you don't have to be a patron to ask us a question. We just do appreciate if you're a patron. Now, today's question is from Jason, or Jay, as he signs off. His question is about underappreciated Athenian generals, which is a fascinating topic. He says, Murray, I really enjoyed your podcast about Demosthenes being one of the first generals to have a dedicated flank attack. Thank you. I have always thought that Demosthenes was criminally underrated among historians because Thucydides writes about a few clever tactics of his. Likewise, I think Thrasybulus is another underrated commander at Athens' last gasp to preserve their democracy. Yet most casual history enthusiasts have probably never heard of either, while mainly focusing on Alcibiades and Pericles. If you could pick one, which one of the two do you think deserves more praise and recognition among historians? Thanks, Jay. All right. So both them, and I would put there in terms of the underappreciated ancient generals, I'd put Brasidas, the Spartan, in there as well. And they're very much blaze like meteors. They come and go very quickly. For instance, Demosthenes, we first hear of him in 426 BC, and he's dead by 413. Brasidas, we first hear of him in 431 BC, and he's dead by 422. So Brasidas is only around for 9 years in the historical record. Demosthenes is only around for 13 years in the historical record. Thrasybulus is around for a bit longer. He appears in 411 BC, and he doesn't die until 388. But he's more complicated in the political scene, shall we say, than Demosthenes, who seems to be almost a thoroughly military figure. And it's one of those things that his career is incredibly cut short by the Sicilian campaign. And it's what would have happened. I mean, what ifs are always tricky, but what would have happened if Demosthenes hadn't died in Sicily? Because he really does appear to me to be just a man who thinks outside the box. And he shows that in Olpi. He then shows it again in Pylos and Sphacteria, and he shows it again in sort of some of his thinking in terms of the Sicilian campaign. At the same time, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because his original campaign in Aetolia goes horribly wrong, and he refuses to go back to Athens in 426 because he knows he's going to be exiled because he's lost the lives of Athenian citizens. So he doesn't go back. That then leads bizarrely to him being asked to help in Aetolia, and that leads to the Battle of Olpi, where he makes amends for all of the wrong that went wrong earlier in the year, and he comes back and he's in full support, and which leads to him being elected as a strategos. So no, it's not as a strategos. He's a strategos when he goes to Aetolia. He's a private citizen, which is even more remarkable, when he tags along with the generals going up the west coast of the Peloponnese, and he stops off in Pylos and essentially makes an opportunity for Pylos and Sphacteria. He's the one who holds up 420 Spartan and Peloponnesian hoplites on the island of Sphacteria. So he really manufactures an opportunity out of nothing, which is remarkable in itself. Leads a very stalwart defence of the fortifications around Pylos when they're attacked with quite limited resources. I think he's only got 60 hoplites. So, he's got the crew of the ships that are there who are fighting with whatever comes to hand. But it's a really remarkable career in that sense. And then, of course, he comes back and he's full of vim, proposes what is the disaster at Delium, and so is one of the sort of generals responsible for that, which doesn't really get held against him because he's not present. He's off trying to foment rebellion in the rest of Boeotia against Thebes. So he doesn't sort of catch the blame for that one. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride, his career, but there's so many remarkable thinkings outside the box that I think, he really does deserve much more attention. Thrasybulus appears in 411 as a pro-democracy candidate during the oligarchic coup in 411, and so the sailors on Samos elect him as their general, and he essentially leads the resistance to that coup. He recalls Alcibiades from exile, and they work together. So again, in Thrasybulus, there's sort of the idea of expediency and doing what needs to be done to secure victory. But at the same time, there's a democratic leaning rather than a autocratic leaning. And when Athens loses the Peloponnesian War and there's a new oligarchy brought in before the democracy is restored, he leads the democratic resistance to that 30 tyrants when they come in 404. He invades Attica with a small bunch of exiles and, successfully defeats the oligarchic forces. And not to mention the Spartan garrison, which doesn't really get enough attention. That it's not the first time that Spartan hoplites are being defeated in the Peloponnesian War, for instance, but he is defeating the Spartan garrison. So, that's important. He then fights on under the newly restored democracy, and he dies in the Corinthian War in 388, leading a naval force. So, again, I think it's much more, it's almost a rearguard action that Thrasybulus is fighting, because he's fighting fellow Athenians as much as he's fighting enemy forces. And he's trying to restore the democracy, which has been overthrown by oligarchs within Athens and then overthrown by Spartan domination at the end of the war. So it's one of those tricky things. He's very much like Demosthenes in the sense that we know very little of him in his early life. We know his father's name, and we know he's from the deme of Styria. We don't even know when he's born. We know that he's married with 2 children, and that he's wealthy because he's a tetrarch. So those are sort of it. We also get the orator Demosthenes tells us that Thrasybulus was one of the great orators, which we don't really get any evidence of in Xenophon, but to persuade the Samian sailors that he should be elected their general to, lead them against the Athenian government. He must have been. So there's Thrasybulus. For me, I know much more about Demosthenes, so I'm going to have to be biased and side with Demosthenes. Sorry about that, Jay. Now, Brasidas is again one of these meteoric generals. We find out about him in 431. He's leading the relief of Methone, which had been besieged by the Athenians in 431. The following year, he seems to have become an ephor, and we then hear about him fighting at Sphacteria. So it's his shield that gets left behind, which is, again, fascinating from the whole don't leave your shield behind. He leaves it behind fighting. I think he's knocked unconscious and the shield's taken off him, and his men drag him away. So it's not regarded as, oh my gosh, it's, with this or on this. It's so embarrassing. But I believe it is his mum that is credited to, which again is Spartan mothers. I think in the Plutarch, it's actually Brasidas's mother who says it to him. And then, of course, weirdly, he doesn't come back with it or on it. He comes back without it, which is like, hang on a minute, what's going on with this? This isn't the story we're normally told. But of course, it's the one that's dedicated in the Agora. So the Athenians find his shield and they bring it back and go, this is this commander of the Spartans' shield who we've got. So it's quite important that he does that. He then appears mustering a force at Corinth, ready for a campaign in Thrace, which will lead to him spectacularly taking Amphipolis off the Athenians. He then realizes that Athens is attacking Megara, so he marches there and comes to Megara. It's even threatened that he might be able to get to Athens, and so the Athenians have one of these emergencies where every single able-bodied man is called out to sort of stop Brasidas from coming, because Athens is vulnerable. And so he then marches on up to Amphipolis in the north, where he does some remarkable campaigning on the way, which includes campaigning with Perdiccas II of Macedon. There's a remarkable march where he is putting his own men on hilltops to prevent them from being attacked by enemy forces or harassed by enemy forces. He's winning as much by democracy and negotiation as he is by battle, and he's causing all sorts of interesting things with not only Perdiccas but with Arrhabaeus, the leader of the Lyncestians. So it's a remarkable accomplishment. He takes Amphipolis, and of course that's when we find the Athenian general Cleon comes to Amphipolis as soon as the year-long truce of 423 is over, and loses spectacularly to Brasidas at the Battle of Amphipolis in 422. And so he has this select group of 150 hoplites, which is a very small select group. The Athenians march in front of the city. They then turn around and march back to Eion. It would seem as if Brasidas waits until at least a third of the Athenian force has gone, probably all of the allies, and so there's 1,200 Athenian hoplites left, one of whom is Socrates, which is fascinating. He then attacks into the flank of the marching Athenian hoplites with his 150, while the rest of the Spartan force come out of the gates of Amphipolis and attack the other wing, the right wing where Cleon was, of the Athenians. And so, according to Thucydides, you've got that force of 150 inflicts 600 casualties, 50% casualties on the Athenians who are taken. So the Athenians take 1,200 and they lose 600 men, which, following on from the plague, the losses at the Battle of Delium, is a big number and a big percentage of the available hoplites for Athens. And the Spartan force at the Battle of Amphipolis only lose 7 men, which is ridiculous. One of the 7, of course, is Brasidas himself, which is a complete disaster. And later, at the Battle of Mantinea in 418, we have the Brasidioi, who are the men of Brasidas, possibly the helots that Brasidas had, who are turned into a lokos in the Spartan army, in addition to the normal 5, which is a sort of a huge honour to those men and to Brasidas's memory. They do get thrown into the meat grinder at Mantinea, and we don't really hear of them again. They may have got munched. But the interesting thing about Brasidas is, again, if he hadn't have died, what tactical, strategic innovations would the Spartans have come up with through him moving forward in the war? We'll never know. So of those 3, sorry, Thrasybulus. Look, I think it's got to be Brasidas, actually. I know you asked me about Athenian generals. I'm going to side with the Spartan. I think Brasidas is bolder, more successful, a more bright meteor. He's only around for 9 years and does remarkable things in that time. Whereas Demosthenes and Brasidas's unalloyed success. Demosthenes starts badly, does something good, goes bad, goes to Sicily. So there's good and bad in Demosthenes, whereas Brasidas is just a history of remarkable generalship thinking. So if I was going to choose between those 3, it would definitely be Brasidas. I hope that answers your question, Jay. And you can, of course, join me for another Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.